fatalities or bottlenecks or inefficiencies for the economy, that's where we need to put the infrastructure money. But it's amazing, as soon as, I've driven all over the country too, in addition to the state, but it's amazing when you cross a border, especially going to Illinois. You think we have road problems? Illinois just demonstrates mismanagement of critical infrastructure. So I think interstate roads and bridges are probably one of the fundamental things that we need to put money into from the federal government, but it's got to fit in with all the priorities. I mean, that's the thing is that it would be wonderful if we had more resources, but now we need to really make some tough choices because we need to live within our means.
Local governments run it because we're the ones that build these things, so we're the ones that have to garner the resources, and we run up against regulation getting pushed down from the federal government to the states, and they push it down to the local governments, and eventually, when we have to do stormwater, sanitary, roads, bridges, and everything starts to crumble, and we can't even start to keep up. The local government, it seems like the money goes to the federal level and then drizzles down, and the local government who does the infrastructure gets it last. I'm just not quite understanding. There's some inefficiency lost between the money going here and just getting drizzled down to us. Some of it's gone.
Yeah, and it's kind of, we're just going to have to go through the entire federal government and make it work within its means. We just can't, we're not going to be able to borrow our way out of this. But certainly, when you buy a house, that's a long-term asset. It lasts for more than the first year. And so most Americans borrow money to buy a house. And and a bridge is the same example. You would usually, for a long-term asset, you would borrow. And so that's where, borrowing by the federal government is certainly allowed by the Constitution. It's something we can all agree on. But right now, we're not borrowing for long-term assets like roads and bridges. We're borrowing for direct payments for things like food stamps for 50 million Americans, or other things. And that's where it just doesn't make any sense. The long-term investment should be where our borrowing and what our borrowing is for. We shouldn't be paying. It's just like living off a credit card, really.
I find it interesting that the federal government can do that, the state to a certain extent, but when you get to the local level, we have restrictions. We cannot go above a certain amount. We can only borrow for essential corporate. We have all these restrictions, and we seem to manage money, I think, statistically, the best, and yet we're the ones that get it the last. So the people that use the money the most efficiently tend to give it last after the cut's been taken from everybody else. So.
Isn't it funny that the folks above you at the state and the feds, they're the ones that put those restrictions, is because you're most local and most accountable to the people. But somehow they know better, and that's just a theme that I'd like to.
So maybe you're catching on.
Right, I get it. And it was the same thing I faced when I was United States Attorney. There were folks out in Washington, D.C. at the Department of Justice that thought that they knew what I should be doing, instead of doing what was the local threats to our public safety. This is a priority, you need to go work on that. It's the same thing, and we need to get rid of that thinking because we need to drive down the decision making to the most appropriate local level that's most accountable to the people. It's amazing that in our country we don't trust the people. We'd rather have people in Washington, D.C. that are unelected make decisions.
That's my frustration, is the people that are the most accountable, are the ones that have the least control sometimes. It's just kind of nuts.
I share your frustration.
You feel my pain?
No, and I see it. I see it, and I would like to bring a different tone for that. One of the things I'm going to do, this is a seat that's currently held by a gentleman named Senator Harkin. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but we don't see him a lot here in Iowa. And I have already, I'll make the pledge to you. I've already made it to my wife, so it's a solemn and sacred pledge. But I'm going to continue to live in Iowa. I'm not going to buy a house in Washington D.C. I'm not going to become part of Washington D.C. I'm going to raise my kids in Iowa, where we're living right now. And one of the things that I'm preparing to do is to make a term limit pledge. Because I don't think you should go out to Washington, D.C. for 18 years and become part of the problem. I mean, there's a chance in 18 years, if you think about that, there's a pretty good chance that my soon-to-be 16-year-old son, I could be a grandfather, right? My oldest is not even 16. If I don't take a term limit pledge, I will be a grandfather by the time I would ever. I look forward to it, but right now I'm just going to get him through high school.
You may be a grandfather by the time you serve your first term.
Yeah, I hope not.
And not to monopolize the questions, but do you have some thoughts on, I'm on the Iowa Finance Authority Board, so obviously we deal with housing programs. And do you have any thoughts on like the housing program, the hard part of how we deal with our housing needs? And just wonder how you thought about some of those.
Dave Jameson
Yeah.
is the director, is a good friend of mine. I've known him for many years. And I really don't have any strong thoughts on the housing programs. I know from the outside looking in that there seems to be a lot of developers that know how to fill out forms and seem to make a pretty good living off of those programs. And so I think it's one of the biggest challenges as to whether the federal government should be in some of those types of games that are been exploited by the ones that can fill out the forms the best.
I hear you say that because I think it's a really needed service, but even being on the board, I struggle with what exactly our role is. So I think it needs better defined, and I think some folks are trying to do that. So I don't know details on what at the federal level.
And it's just always, and I saw this with, do you guys remember CTEC by chance? It was the training consortium. When I was U.S. attorney, we prosecuted that case. You may remember that. And Ramona Cunningham and that whole thing. And the thing that always concerned me about that was where we are just giving chunks of federal money and pushing it down and saying, you decide. We're taking the money from somebody and we're giving it to somebody else to say. And it never felt right to me. And it was never equal which states got it. It was all based on political favors and the very complicated calculation. Medicare payments, my understanding is the same way, or at least it has been traditionally. And so all of those types of block grants, direct shifts of taxpayer money have always given me a little uneasy. I haven't studied sort of how the Finance Authority gives out their money and.
I think as an authority, we're extremely conscientious about the QAP, the criteria that goes out, and people meeting it and people complying with it. But where, I kind of struggle is how much is enough and to what program is the most effective, to how much do you bolster it compared to the fair market. It's always kind of a balance we're doing this with. So.
And then it always seems like the same people win the project. And I just kind of wonder there's something I can't figure out, and probably because I'm not smart enough, right? But it's.
There's a very, very tightly crafted QAP, and
Right.
you got to make the points. But to your point, and sometimes it's what it is with grants. He or she who can write the best script garners the money. So.
Yeah. What other questions y'all have?